All right, gang, welcome aboard. It's time once again for the weekly Mac Forum video chat. We got things on the road and ready to go here. As you can see, I want to be sure that I point out to you, we got a lot on the show tonight that I want to cover. So let's get right into it to see what's going on this week. First of all, I want to point something out. This thread goes back before last week's show, but I wanted to bring it back again to point something out. This is something that is still good. It's an ongoing deal. It deals with the new Apple file system, APFS, which was introduced with the advent of High Sierra, the current Mac OS version. High Sierra has with it a change to the file system in the sense that it did not it stays with a lot of functions of Sierra, but one of the things that changes is you can convert a drive from HFS Plus, which has been the file system, the default Mac file system for more than a decade now. In fact, I think it's probably closer to 2 decades. And this current system, APFS, was designed to help file rewrite operations, and among other things, and especially to accommodate the fact that hard drives are much larger now than they were when HFS Plus was introduced, and also that we have more files and larger files given the proliferation of the different media that most people have on their drives. But I do want to point something out to you. If you have a drive that's already been converted to APFS, you want to make sure before you use a drive utility, such as disk utility or any of these disk drill, any kind of utility that's going to interact with the drive and maybe change the drive structure, you want to make sure that that drive has been cleared for use with APFS, because if not, you've got a problem on your hands in the sense that you could potentially damage things. So let's look and see how you go about looking at that. How do you determine if your drive is on APFS? One way to do that, I'm going to go here and I'm going to, let me just close my browser window for a second here, get it out of the way. I want to show you one way to do that real quickly. We're going to go and we're going to choose Get Info on our main drive. And the next thing you see is a window like this one, the Get Info window. And normally, a lot of times, if you haven't opened the window before, these triangles are all closed off, okay? They're not open at all. These were open because I've looked at various drive parameters in the last few weeks. But let's go. The area you want to look at is in the General tab. All right, you want to look right there. And as you can see, it gives you a lot of information. Creation date, modification date. The OS version is there, although that's not the most convenient place to determine your OS version. Capacity is there, available space. But look right here, the thing you're interested in is format. If it says HFS Plus, then you're on the same formatting that was used with Sierra. If it says APFS, your drive is already set up for the newer file system that's in place with High Sierra. And in that case, you need to make sure that whatever drive utility that you use is clear for use with APFS drives. Some of the utilities have been updated. Make sure that you have the updated versions. Okay, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to get our screen back up here. And we'll go ahead with a few other things that we have on the agenda for the evening. The next one has to do with two-factor authentication, which is turning out to be a very confusing thing for a lot of our users. Apple instituted two-factor authentication a while ago to reduce the possibility of someone's Apple ID, iCloud account, etc., being compromised. And essentially, the reason it's called two-factor authentication is that when you go to your account and you attempt to do something like make a change, such as change a password, something of that nature, in addition to the normal procedure, you have to enter a 6-digit code, numeric code. That code gets sent to you when you try to make the change on a trusted device. And that's where some people have had some issues in terms of how you set up trusted devices, etc. Well, I know last week I said I was going to look at that a little more in depth. I haven't gotten around to researching that as much as I would like, so we're going to put that off probably until next week. But the one thing I want to point out to you, if you want to know where those settings are, if you're running iOS 11, those settings have been moved a little bit from where they used to be. And forum member Crozing asked about the process of adding trusted devices so that you can have more than one device in that list. These settings are not in the same place, but as you can see, Lisa, one of our forum members, pointed out where they are now. You can go to your phone settings, tap on settings, and scroll till you find your name at the top of the screen, and tap where it says Apple ID, iCloud, iTunes, and then tap password and security. And here's where you can make changes. You can turn on two-factor authentication if you don't have it already, and add a trusted phone number to the list. You can add a trusted device. That device can be an iPad, something like that. And this is a big change for some folks, but it is an important step to take. Once you've got that two-factor authentication enabled, I think it's a good idea to have more than one device, as long as it's a device that you have control over, to be able to get that verification code if you need it. And then some of our forum members have had some problems with this process, which is why I'm going to talk about that a little bit more next week. I think it's an important issue because new Apple IDs, as they are created, I believe the default is two-factor authentication. So you've got to really understand the way that process works to make the best use of it. All right, let's move on out of two-factor authentication to Adobe Flash issues. In our security awareness area, member Randy Singer has got a thread going that talks about Flash pop-ups and the need for Flash on Mac. Growing numbers of Mac users are avoiding Flash because of security issues and because of performance issues. But there are still some sites that haven't really been updated to work with HTML5, so you're still stuck using Flash. Randy takes you through some ideas for how to make sure that the version that you get of Flash is the correct one, and he has some links there. One of the things you want to be sure that you do, as you travel the web, you're almost bound to run into situations where a website tells you that your version of Flash is out of date, or drop-down dialog box pops up and says, your version of Flash is out of date, please update in order to view thus and such content. Now that could be from the site or from a piece of adware that's on the site. In any case, I don't update Flash that way, okay? I generally, when I'm updating Flash, I will do it through the system preference pane. As you can see, it's, let me just pull that preference pane up and give you a little bit of an idea of what you're looking for. I generally will do it there, or I will manually enter the Adobe page. I'll search and manually enter that page in a web browser and go directly to Adobe to get it. As you can see, this is what the Flash pane, preference pane looks like. You can control a number of things from this position, including which sites and activities have access to the cameras and mics. I tend to have that where it's forced to ask. I don't necessarily block everything, although I have had it set that way, and I think I'm going to change that so that it blocks it until it asks me. Playback, same thing. I've got a plugin installed. I'm using Click to Flash currently to make sure that Flash only loads when I ask for it. As you can see, you can control a number of things, and in the Update tab, you can check for to see if your version of Flash is up to date. And I have the pane set to notify me instead of updating. Your options are allow Adobe to install the update automatically, and that's their recommended one. I choose not to do that. I just wanted to let me know when it's out of date. Then I can do some checking online and see if the version that is available seems to be clean, and then I can choose to update. I don't let it automatically do that. There are not many things on my computer that automatically update. That's just a preference on my part. And as you can see, there are some other settings that you can also control in this preference pane. So get familiar with those settings. If you don't understand one of them, ask a question in the forum. They're pretty self-explanatory, though. I don't think you'll have a problem with that. All right. And as I say, Randy's thread points out some things that you need to know or keep in mind when you're updating Flash. And these kinds of pop-ups, depending upon where you visit, may pop up quite frequently. Sometimes you don't see them very often. If you're running things, if you've got Java turned off, you may not see as much of them as some people do. It's partly dependent on where you visit. So you may or may not see a lot of these. Some people do see this message quite a lot. All right, next one, this particular thread has to do with software updating. More specifically, High Sierra. And let me clarify something. Some people are wondering why High Sierra was not showing up for them as an update. Okay, and let me clarify that there are two reasons for that in this case. First of all, if you're running Sierra, it's not going to show up as an upgrade, as an update rather, because it's an upgrade. There's a difference. When you go from, say, 10.12, which was Sierra, to 10.13, that's a completely new version. That's considered an upgrade. That doesn't show up in the normal updating process. If you were to go from, say, 10.12.1 to 10.12.2, that would show as an upgrade. The other reason High Sierra is not showing for people is that Apple has recently changed that process a little bit. What you do now is the version of the OS that is current is going to show up on the main page when you go into the App Store. Let's just take a quick look here. And you can see now, normally it would pop up in updates under the old procedure. In this case, it's popping up right here on the main page, and you can click on it and go directly to it. Now, Also, the other thing you want to be aware of, Sierra, which was the previous version, is no longer showing in the App Store if you haven't already downloaded it. So do be aware of that. I still say, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, even if you don't intend to make an upgrade, download that installer, put it away on a hard drive somewhere so that if you want it at a later date, it doesn't disappear from the App Store. That's just a good policy to get into, even if you've got multiple versions on the same hard drive. You can generally work with that. But the reason you're not seeing High Sierra is because, the reason you're not seeing High Sierra right now is you've got to go to the main page and look for it as opposed to looking through the update process. All right, now this thread that deals with a 2011 MacBook Pro that's running a little bit slow and the fans are kicking into high gear, etc., etc., etc. I link to it not because of something specific to this computer, but it gives you, there's some good advice here in terms of what you need to check to start thinking about the process of whether it's time to upgrade to a new machine. 2011 machines are 6 years old now. And depending upon when you got it in 2011, we're coming up on 7 years here real soon. Now, for some of you, that may not be that big a deal, depending on what you do. And this is the important thing. If you're doing something that's very graphic intensive, very CPU intensive, and the machine is slowing down, there are some things that you need to look at. And the process of deciding whether to upgrade can be a, shall we say, confusing one, to say the least, because sometimes it's hard to tell, am I having an issue because I don't have enough memory? Am I having an issue because I don't have enough drive space? Is it really pushing the CPU too hard? This is a good thread to get you thinking about some of those questions, regardless of the age of your machine. And just for kicks and grins, I linked back to an article that I wrote about this particular Macintosh. And looking at the date, I see this is dated October of 2007. Holy cow, I can't believe it was that long ago. This magazine, unfortunately, is no longer doing new content. Everything in it is stuff that was written several years ago. But I linked to this. First of all, it's a good point for older users. If you've got an older machine, you're running some older software, you might find some useful information there. Not just from things that I've written, but there were a number of very talented people writing for that magazine, very knowledgeable people. I sometimes felt like a Mac idiot when we would do our stories, you know. But yeah, Mac moron. No, you did not hear me say that. I will never admit that again. So you guys better record this if you want me to admit that again, because you'll never hear it again. But I linked to this article for one reason. At the time, I was running a G5, and I was dealing with an issue of how do I know when it's time for me to upgrade? I was running 512 megabyte of memory, if you can believe it. And I was starting to look at the issue of what do you do? What do you do in terms of upgrades that might speed it up? Because I really needed to speed it up. It certainly was at a point where I needed to think about getting a new machine, but budget constraints, i.e. lack of funds, made that highly unlikely at the time. So I started examining the issue of what kinds of upgrades can you do to make this workable. And I have to tell you, as someone who has done upgrades on a number of machines, if you don't believe me, take a look at the FrankenMac article I wrote for ATPM, you can chase your tail in circles, sometimes with upgrades, for very little performance improvement. But here's one of the ideas that I talk about a little more fully in this article. First of all, I talk about a little bit about why I didn't use benchmark software to help me make the decision. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with benchmarking software per se. But here's the deal. The whole purpose of benchmarking software is to try to stress your system to see where the breakdowns are. And that's a great idea, except for one thing. I don't think that kind of situation necessarily reflects what everybody does with their computer. For example, if you are mainly using your computer for internet, email, web page viewing, things of that nature, knowing how well your computer performs a complex 3D render or a Photoshop layering, something of that nature, something complex like that, that doesn't tell you much because it doesn't reflect what you personally do with the computer. And it dawned on me at some point in writing this article that I really do believe that most Mac users update their computers based on a perceived drop in speed, a significant perceived drop in speed. So, for example, if you're working on a task that you do routinely, and that task takes up more time than you're willing to allow for it, then now you see a need to upgrade. You see a perceived speed drop. And that explains why, you know, if you are in a business and you're doing video editing, say, for example, and you're working on a deadline, and that's part of your income, then the fact that it is taking longer and longer to edit that video is a big deal to you, and it might drive your decision to upgrade. If you're a home hobbyist playing around with video, and it takes longer than you think it should, that may or may not bother you. I used to run some video conversions on my 2008 MacBook. When I first got the MacBook, it was running them pretty quickly. But here recently, when I run those kinds of video conversions, take a large M2T file, for example, which sometimes can run many gigabyte, depending on what you're doing, and try to convert it to something else. That slowed down significantly on that older machine. But it's not a big deal because I can start it at night before I go to bed. If it's not done by the next morning, I don't care because I'm going to work anyway, and it can just sit there and crank and grind on that file all day if need be. That would not be practical if I were doing this as a business. And it probably also would be much more annoying if I were sitting in front of the computer watching the little spinning wheel go by, or getting the, as I call it, the spinning wheel of impending doom periodically. So how you use your computer, the number of apps you have open, the number of large files you're dealing with, all of those things, I think, have more to do with whether or not a user upgrades than whether they pass or fail some benchmark score. And you can take a look at that article if you're interested. It goes into a little more detail. And then kind of along the same lines, here's something else to think about. We had a thread going asking about video and photo editing software recommendations. And that thread has been going for a while, but recently there was a post from someone who wanted to know how I could get rid of this, as you can see, and change it so that you could put a different graphic right there. And Randy comes through again with some recommendations. And then I'm going to link specifically to a post by member Rad Dave, because he decided, hey, wait a minute. I wonder if you can do this with software that you already have. And he figured out a way to do it in preview. And the example that he shows for how to do it is just kind of a quick and dirty way. You probably could get better results with preview. If you took a little more time with it, you can see the results he got in just a fairly short period of time. But the reason I linked to this particular post is it points up something else that you need to know when you're dealing with your Mac, particularly in the beginning. Before you go out and spend a huge sum of money on third-party software to do a particular task, poke around the settings on the software that's included with your Mac and see if it can be done with one of the pieces of software that's already installed. For example, Preview can do some basic graphic conversion, some really basic graphic editing, etc., etc., etc. It's a pretty good PDF reader, therefore you might not need Adobe. The PDF creation features built into the OS may be sufficient for you. Check all of those things out before you go out and invest in a lot of third-party software. Now, having said that, there are some times when you're going to need some third-party software or additional software anyway to get a particular task done. Let me show you what I mean. I have on my hard drive, as you can see from my dock here, a free program called Handbrake that I use for video conversions, and I use it quite regularly. I've got a couple of other video conversion programs on my hard drive, though, because, and this is important, every once in a while, I run into a file that one program doesn't fully process properly, and another program may come closer to getting me the results I need. And sometimes it's hard to figure out why the first program didn't work. I've run into occasions recently, and I think it was some file corruption that caused the issue, where Handbrake, which is normally a very reliable program, didn't process the entire file. And I dropped the file into a different program, and lo and behold, it processed a little bit better. Sometimes you get a file that's so mangled that nothing processes. But it's always good to have more than one option, so you can kind of pick and choose the one that does the most of what you need. All right, let's see what's next here. I don't want to pin that. It's already set up. I'll talk a little more about this next week, but I'm going to throw this in here as a bonus. My old buddy Kirk McLaren, on his Kirkville site, as you can see, he's got something in here that I forgot was in the current version of Safari. And I like this. Let's just take a quick look at it. If you go into Safari's preferences and you go to the website tab and you go to page zoom, you will see a bunch of sites that I've already built settings for. You can, let's say you find that a particular site has fonts that are too small, and they do that consistently. You can go in, add that site, and change the default. As you can see, I've got quite a few of mine set to 125%. You can adjust it for different sites. I've got a few that are 100%, one or two that are 75, just because of differences in the fonts that they use. This is a neat little feature. And I will say this, in the past, I have done it with a little bit of CSS script that Charlie sent to me. I stopped using it CSS version when I discovered this this option. I had forgotten about this one until I read Kirk's article. But the other reason that I stopped is the CSS script in the version of Safari that was in the High Sierra beta. When the CSS script was turned off, some functions did not work properly on the MacForum website, and the minute I turned it off and went back to no CSS, everything worked fine. So I turned off using the CSS sheet and went to using this method. I find it works reasonably well for me. So that's just something to keep in mind. If need be, I'll talk more about this next week, okay? Because there are a lot of other settings that you can control in this area. As you can see, autoplay, I've made some comments about that before. It works well. Content blockers, etc. All right, so that takes care of that little tip. I probably will talk more about that dialog box next week. All right, and finally, I want to, as a laugh out loud kind of thing here, Charlie, one of our forum admins, posted something. It's a little bit off topic for the thread, but I figured it was worth a good laugh, and it fits right in there with the thing I mentioned last week about iOS 11 trying to give me a driver's license. Here's one for you. Charlie noticed he was looking to get some packing material to ship a 27-inch iMac to someone, and he discovered a company, okay? There's a website that specializes in providing boxes and packing for all makes and models of computers, desktops, and notebook. The box and packing material for the iMac costs $53, and that's not including the shipping cost to ship it via UPS or FedEx. That's $53 just for the packing material. Now, I doubt seriously that if you went to your local pack and mail, whatever you want to call those stores, they're all over the country. UPS has them, FedEx has them, etc., etc., etc. I bet if you went there and bought the packing material, it would not cost you $53. Okay, as opposed to paying this company the $53 for the packing material, waiting for the packing material to come to you, and then shipping the computer off where you need it to go. Okay, if you decide to go this route, and I'm not swearing to you that this is a ripoff, but before you do this, check with some of your local packing and shipping outfits to see what they charge, because I bet you can do better than $53. I had a good laugh when I read this. Figured you might need this one as a good laugh. And last but not least, I'm not going to go into all of these tonight because of the length of the show, but I'm going to link to a YouTube video. 13 different iPhone settings that you might want to change depending on how you use your phone. The reason I won't walk is, to be honest with you, the video is pretty self-explanatory. The guy does a pretty good job of explaining why he thinks these need to be turned off. You may not agree with all of his choices. That's the whole point. You can go through, pick out the ones that you think are applicable to you. As you can see, it takes about 10 minutes to go through the entire video. Everything is self-explanatory, and I think you might find a few useful tidbits of information. There are several privacy changes that he recommends, specifically as it deals with some of the analytics and collection of tracking data for advertising purposes, etc., etc., etc. So give that a quick check. And as usual, I'll have the links to all of this in the show notes. And this week, I got the show notes typed up ahead of time, so we'll probably have them up within a few minutes here. And as soon as I do, I'll post the link on the show page for this week. And that's going to just about do it for this week, as a matter of fact. The World Series has started, and as I can see, the bases are loaded. So I'm about to head on out of here and check out what's going on. Hit the rewind button on the DVR, find out what happened. It's already been a good sports day. Both the Saints and Cowboys won, so we'll see what happens in the World Series. Until next week, this is your host, Sylvester Rock, a.k.a. Sly Dude on the forum. I'll see you in the forum, and if you've got an idea for a topic that you'd like to see me discuss, make sure you post it somewhere in the forum. Preferably, the best place to do it is in the show thread. I don't mind when somebody PMs me with a show idea, but sometimes my mailbox gets completely full, and you get a thing back that says no more space, etc., etc., etc. I think I've cleaned it up now. You shouldn't run into that problem. But in any case, just pass it on in the show thread, and we'll see you next week, guys.